I asked people for any input on things that we might want to talk about this morning. So one of the things that came up from one of the agents at Big Bear's office was whether or not or how to handle when a buyer's agent and you're a listing agent and the buyer's agent checks box Q5 or Q6 on the contract. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with those, but Q5 is a government required point of sale inspections and reports, and Q6 is government required point of sale corrective and remedial actions. And then you can select between buyer, seller, or both to be responsible for that. And, you know, I think it's a good practice to know what's current in your area. I don't know about the Lake Arrowhead area so much, but in Big Bear, we really don't have any government required point of sale inspections. But now we have to deal with some things that come up usually within 12 months of the sale that could be construed as point of sale, the way they're being handled locally here with things like low flow toilets. You know, you can sell a house without having the lower flow toilets, but then you can disclose that they're not the lower flow toilets. But if somebody has checked this box, is that going to come back to bite you when the Department of Water contacts them and wants to do a survey on whether or not they have low flow toilets in their house and finds out that they don't, and then they have to convert them? And I know it's a minor cost issue because most of the time, at least the local DWP up here in Big Bear, they do have programs to get low flow toilets for reduced pricing and things like that. So that's good. But the question that I was given was, would you counter out Q5 and Q6 if it was on your contract? And in my opinion, yes, I would when I'm writing the counter offer, because it just leaves it wide open. If somebody gets contacted down the road about the new fire inspection that Janelle had talked about a couple of weeks ago, or the retrofitting of toilets or low flow fixturing in the house. But I did verify that we don't have any that is currently required. At least that's what Jennifer Brown had gotten for us on last time I inquired with her on that. So anybody have any input on that? Anybody?
Go, Monica.
Yes, Monica. Hi, Monica.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Lake Arrowhead is the same. I always tell everybody counter those items out because it's not applicable. It does not apply to us up here.
Right. And I think the best way to keep yourself out of, well, you know, 8 months into it, we found out that we have to replace the toilets, which honestly, those are required for any homeowner, not for a point of sale, right? At least in the Big Bear area. Is that what your opinion is too, Monica?
Yes. I let people know that how much it reduces water through the water flows. I give them several companies that we use up here that do the interchanging, you know, that are licensed plumber contractors that can change out the toilets for them. Because some of them too, some of the toilets sit way low, like for little midgets. You know, it's like, and they're the old ones from the 60s or 70s in some of these cabins. So I let them know, you know, here's companies that do it. Go to your water company. Sometimes they do, like you said, give them coupons for, you know, to interchange out with like Home Depot or Lowe's. Sometimes also have the programs in the springtime. You'll see that those two large companies do the program as well. Yeah. And then the other item, and so low floor toilets would be one reason. That's one that I can think of in our area. It might come back up in the first year of ownership from the Department of Water wanting to do a survey on whether or not you've complied at your new home. And most buyers are going to say, well, how come nobody told me about that or whatever? So for example, when I do an Avid and I walk through a house, I always look to see if they're indicated with the 1.6 or better flow on the toilets. And if I don't see it labeled clearly on the toilet, I use the word may, but I say toilet in this bathroom may not be low flow.
just to protect everybody. And then the same thing comes up with this fire inspection that Janelle had talked about a couple of weeks back on our mastermind, when now, even though we're only closing 50 to 60 units in a 30-day window here in Big Bear, the fire department has a person who can do these inspections, and they're going to notify everyone within 12 months of a title change and want to check their property, whether or not it complies with all the defensible space, which really it should be complied with all the time. And, if we're going to be fire safe, the fire department should make it out there. So I don't know how delaying it down 12 months down the road is going to help the fire department catch up with all the inspections they have to do. So I had indicated at that meeting that we should get the fire department involved in, let's go out and check the properties as they come on the market. And if there's things that need to be done, but it's not a point of sale requirement, but it is a disclosure requirement. Is that correct with everybody? Is that what everybody thinks? Or?
Yes, but I have a question on that. When we have the amount of snow that we do, how can we do that?
Yeah, well,
that doesn't prevent you from disclosing anything. My understanding is that this process just allows the city or whatever division of the city at any point in the future can go and check and make sure it was done in arrears. But you're saying you have the work done. How can you do that with the amount of snow?
Right. Or have a fire captain come out, or someone from the fire department come out and inspect the property.
Yeah, the checking, just
everything is covered.
Kick that down the road.
Yeah, I think it's problematic right now, especially with the amount of snow, and it's not unlike how do you inspect a roof during a transaction, or how do you inspect termite under decks, or termite or dry rot on top of decks. Not a lot of the time, but sometimes I'll have a seller that will be proactive and have all those areas cleared so that we can have access to those. Other times we've paid people to go out and clear the decks and things so that we can get an accurate inspection. I think as a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, you might want to address those issues before the people go out, because it's just going to be additional cost to have them come back out time and time again, and it may slow down your transaction.
It definitely will. Let me throw a question related to this kind of out to the group, exactly where you guys are going, Steve and Monica. Is we're sitting here at March 22nd, and do you guys have escrows that you're just going to close anyways, even if you can't see this or that? Or is everything you have pushing because it's totally stalled? Or are there creative things? And we got to be careful with creativity that we're doing to get them closed. Like what's happening with your actual deals right now?
I closed 3 last week. No, the week prior, when we could not have the people come up, residents only. So, and I was stuck in my house, and I hired out Star and Andrea to drive down the mountain, pick up the client and the buyer's agent, drive them up. But I also made sure all decks, driving decks, everything was clear of snow. Mm-hmm. And my sellers were very proactive. They said, yes, please get that done so that we can, facilitate the closing and make sure that the buyers are happy. Plus they didn't want the weight of the snow on their decks or driving decks or their roof. So we were able to do that. So I was able to close 3 deals the week prior.
Yeah.
So that they could do their final walkthrough, make sure everything was in the same fashion as when they entered the transaction.
And I had a couple that closed during that window of time also, and these were agents from out of the area, which it makes it even more difficult because they're not familiar with the snow situation and what reality is in our market or our area. But I did go out and do videos with the listing agent and sometimes even the buyer, even though I was the selling agent, not the selling agent, but the listing agent. And I'd walk through and show them the condition and the property, not to forego a walkthrough, but to give them a peace of mind with what they're buying into, And we did make recommendations to all of them to have driveways cleared and and things like that, so it didn't become ice like we all know it does. So,
Yeah.
and the creative thing of going down the hill, like Monica said, that's a great. I think Janelle was saying that she went and got an appraiser, picked him up in Apple Valley to get him up here. I don't know if it was Janelle for sure, but one of the people at the office there. So anyway, the Q5, Q6, I think everybody's in agreement. Are you in agreement on that too, Jim, that we should pretty much counter those out if they are checked?
Yeah, I'm in line with that.
Okay.
I'm channeling my inner Jen and Kelly right now. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Steve, I do agree with that. I think the cleaner it is, and then we don't have to worry about it later on. And since it's not a point of sale, then, you know, at least we've got that taken care of at the beginning. I believe in
Right.
doing it.
Great. So if it becomes an issue though, during the sale, and what I would tell my seller is if the buyer will not agree to remove those from the contract, then you may be obligated to, at least on the two items we know can come up, to take action on these items so that you don't come back and get bit in the, you know, on it later. So the other thing I wanted to talk about this morning, because one of the team members on my team, we were working on this last couple of days, notice to perform for the buyer or the seller. In this case, the buyer usually is the one that gets a notice to perform, from what I've been familiar with. And it's not a form that we use every day or every month, depending on the transaction you're in, but it's in the main contract. And just so it is clear to everybody, because I know what we do, we don't always read the contract. We just assume we know what the form is for, right? So notice to buyer or seller to perform. The notice to buyer to perform or notice to seller to perform shall be in writing, be signed by the applicable buyer or seller, and given to the other party at least 2 days after the delivery or until the time frame specified in the applicable paragraph, whichever occurs last. To take applicable action, a notice to buyer to perform or notice to seller to perform may not be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date to remove a contingency or cancel this agreement or meet an obligation specified in paragraph 14, whether or not the scheduled performance day falls on a Saturday, Sunday, a legal holiday. So if a notice to buyer to perform and notice to seller to perform is incorrectly delivered or specifies a time less than the agreed time, the notice shall be deemed invalid or void. And seller or buyer may be required to deliver a new notice to buyer to perform or notice to seller to perform within the specified time frame. So anybody have any questions about that?
Well, it's just preventing you from doing a notice to perform earlier than 2 days from the deadline, right?
Right. So normally the way it goes, and I shouldn't say normally because everybody does things different, but
No such thing, right?
You'll get a default on something that's a contractual item, and then you'll send out a notice to perform, right? We didn't realize they weren't going to remove their contingency on time. So once they didn't, then we sent them a notice to perform, and now we've got to wait 2 more days before we can take any action with cancellation or have any rights as a seller, right? So what I would say is if you have a problematic transaction that you know things are not going according to the contract and you want to enforce the actual time period, then follow what it says in the paragraph I just read, which is in the RPA, that states that you can send it out no sooner than 2 days before it's due. So let's say your loan contingency is due on Friday, then you can send it out on Wednesday.
But if you send it Monday or Tuesday, it's not even valid.
That's correct. You can't send it before Wednesday. And if you do, then you're going to have to send a new one out once the time is actually within the window or has expired on the contract. So anyway, you can make it a little more stringent by sending it out 2 days before, with right at that window, you know, on the Wednesday evening, and say, look, I know it's due on Friday, but I wanted to give you the notice to perform because we'd like to have this back on time. We've got timelines to meet here. And the thing with the snow that Monica mentioned, or we all are dealing with, sometimes this is really important because we might have a 30-day escrow and a 20-day contingency period for a loan, or 17 days or 14 days. And the seller is going to have less than a week or 2 weeks to get all of their stuff out of the house that they need to get out personals wise, if they're not including everything there. And getting up here and getting down the hill in the winter, even in a normal winter, can be problematic, right? So, and then when you look at the actual notice to perform, it spells it out down here in the bottom paragraph. It's in bold. It says, buyer, if you do not remove the specified contingencies on the form itself, you got that there? Great. It's down at the bottom, Jaylene. There you go. If you do not remove the specified contingencies and take specified contractual actions indicated within 2, there's a spot for you to give them more time if you want to, but no less than 2 days as specified in the agreement days after the delivery of this notice to buyer to perform, the seller may cancel the agreement. So that's another thing, and I'm sure most people know this, but sending this out doesn't mean you have to cancel. It's letting them know you're going to put that in play, that the seller has a right to cancel the agreement if you don't perform to the contract.
But what
What
you're
happens
doing is
if
you're overlapping the 2 days of notice on top of the normal contingency period that was already in place. So that if you do that on a Wednesday, when the deadline is Friday, then Saturday, correct me if I'm wrong, over the weekend, you can cancel Saturday.
That's the way I read it, Jim.
Okay.
We might want to check with Kelly, but they have to remove the contingency on Friday, not Saturday or Sunday. So Friday is a business day, if that's the question you're asking.
It is.
A cancellation, you could send it out, I believe, on the weekend with the seller signing it, but you still have to get buyer agreement to, cancel an escrow.
Mhm.
Usually, most escrow companies want both parties to agree,
But
especially
you've
if you're going to
removed-
release a deposit.
But you're in position on Saturday, you would be in position that the buyer is not able to perform no matter what they do because their time has run out contractually. Uh-oh, Steve got muted. Aileen, what, you didn't want to hear from Steve anymore? What's going on?
Oh, there he is. Steve, you muted yourself.
I think
I
you
don't-
can unmute
Yeah.
him.
There we
you
go. Yeah, I don't know what I said or I didn't say, but
It wasn't me.
yeah, I think, you send it out on a Friday or Wednesday, and it says that on Friday we have the right to cancel if you haven't removed your contingencies. And so when they don't remove them on Friday, then yes, you have the right to cancel starting the next day, calendar day. I don't think that's specific to business days. Contingency periods in general are based on business days, not counting business days, but they can't end on a weekend or a holiday, correct? Is that everybody's agreement?
That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, the reverse side, where
Go.
what happens if the seller is not? So we had a problem, Jim knows, with one of the first deals that one of my team members, Allison, did. And we had a crazy seller who would not comply to anything. And then she kept adding to her STRs. We were on the buying side. And our buyers had signed off all their contingency from day one in order to purchase this house at a lower price. And when it came to the end, the seller was not complying with anything that we needed to do. And so we finally served her with a notice to perform. And that was the safeguard for our buyer to get all their money back because she still didn't perform.
So did it close?
Nope, we walked. And the
Okay.
buyers got all their money because she kept adding to her STR calendar and wanted us to keep extending out, extending out, and extending out. And we kept saying, no, we're not extending out anymore.
Right, and now I think another form might have been applicable there, which would be the demand to close.
We sent that out as well.
Yeah, yeah. So was that at the advice of anyone in particular, Monica, or did you just come up with that solution? I don't mean
I
I don't
went
mean that the
ahead
wrong.
and I had Allison send that out because I noticed that she had signed off all of her contingency removals. So I said, the way that this listing agent and this seller are working, let's send that out, because if she does not respond to that, at least your buyers are going to get their money back.
Right, and what
And
was
then
the
we went to-
contractual action or contingency that the seller had to remove?
The seller didn't have, the seller did not perform to anything. She didn't, we were to close. We were a week out from closing. We sent the demand to close to her. We sent out the notice to perform. We did everything. And this seller was impossible to deal with. I felt bad for the listing agent because he was having a lot of problems with her throughout the transaction.
Sure. So what if your buyer said, no, I'm getting such a good deal on the house. I don't want to back out, but I want to buy it.
Nope, they lost faith in her towards
Right,
the
but
end.
what if? Well, I mean, you would have a buyer that would be like, okay, I wish I could close tomorrow, but the seller still wants to rent it out.
Then we would
I don't
have,
wanna
we would
cancel.
have to come to we would have to come to an agreement with everybody and have an ironclad agreement that you're going to be out by such and such date and you're going to stop with your STRs.
I'm getting an
Right.
education in STRs by being up here, you guys. I mean, are you guys doing property to be delivered vacant on STR purchase? Like if
Some
I
of
was buying a home in Orange County and there was a renter in there, on the purchase agreement, I would say, one of the things I would say is property to be delivered vacant.
Right.
I mean, we have
And so if I was up here buying a house that's offered out for STR, I would
Mhm.
make sure every purchase agreement says delivered vacant. Elaine,
Where would you put that? I'm sorry, I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't done it in a long time, but you can.
I would put it on an addendum. I would make
It's like,
sure
I
it's
don't
on
know
an-
that one.
I'm
make-
not giving you the answer. I'm just a puzzle. You have to go find it.
Oh, thanks. Okay, there you go.
I would put it on an addendum stating that. And maybe one that doesn't go to the lender. So like when we do the furnishings.
I mean, and if
Well-
you can get away with it, like a reverse per diem, property to be delivered vacant, and then a $200 per day to the buyer if the seller goes past the COE. I mean, not that they would agree to it, but if you wanted something ironclad to say, hey, we're gonna close on this day. Because yeah, the seller, I've seen that a number of times now, where the seller's like, oh, I got some great renters in there for a week, so I'm just gonna ignore you for a week.
Well, how about if you, like what we were dealing with yesterday with Star and Andrea's transaction, that they're the buying agent. And
So if you-
in the MLS, it says owner occupied, and they come to find out that there's a tenant in there. And there was no TOPA, no nothing disclosing that that was a tenant, not owner occupied property.
You know,
And it is through a court thing because of a divorce.
Right. So if you're writing an offer on a property that's short-term rental and you want the protection of the property to be unoccupied at the time of the close, then you could still use a TOPA in section M3 and indicate that you want the property to be vacated prior to the close of escrow,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So because that's where it states, possession occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller is what it reads for M3. I know we don't normally do that. Usually, sometimes in Big Bear anyway, the new buyer may want to take over the rentals and they've got to get the correct permitting and everything else to do that. But that might be a way around that if you think it's going to be a problem with getting it done. The other thing is if I have a contract, let's say I have a contract to buy a property for $300,000 and I and my agent and we feel that the value is much better than that. and they're still not cooperating, we can go after them for specific, for the contract, for performance on the contract, and we can still buy it. I mean, that happens quite often. That's some of the things I think that go down in mediation and things like that. Ken would know maybe more. Ken's on the call, isn't he, Ken?
Yeah, he's on the call.
Yeah, I mean, he's worked on the arbitration or.
What was the question, Steve?
Well, I was saying if you've got a contract to buy a property and you're getting a great deal on it, but the seller's not cooperating with the sell, you can still go after them for specified contractual performance, right?
Yeah, you can technically force them to sell you the house, and if they don't, you can then go to you'd go to arbitration, mediation, and then work it out from there, whether it becomes a financial number that they give you or they force them to actually sell you the house. Because once they've signed it, the seller loses all their rights. Unless the buyer doesn't perform, they have to sell that house, and
Right.
yeah, I had a situation where prior to being an agent, but I had a deal where we went driving by an open house, went in, looked at it, went, this doesn't look right. And we wrote an offer immediately. We went into escrow. And then as the weekend went on, everybody came in and they realized they underpriced it. So the seller's agent came to me and said, hey, I'll give you 50 grand to get out of the deal. And I said, well, you underpriced it 75 grand. I'm not getting out of the deal. And then they came back and said, the buyer will give you 25 grand. And the seller will give you 50 grand. That was another buyer. And I said, I'm not getting out of it. And I closed the escrow and kept the house.
Yeah.
I forced them in that case to do it.
Was that a primary residence for them or a second, third property?
It was a primary for me. I was moving from Anaheim Hills to Villa Park, and I told them, look, I already enrolled my kid in school there. I was just looking for the right house. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You got to sell it to me,
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of rights when I was doing my inspections and stuff because they were praying that I would, default on something or ask for something they could not do. But it was such a good price that I wasn't going to stop buying it no matter what. Even if I didn't keep it, I was going to spin it, But they have, once the seller loses all their rights, period. And they have to wait for the buyer to do something wrong. And I've had that situation up here where the people had no contingency on the appraisal, but the appraisal came in and they backed out because it came in low, and the lady was just being very hard, and I was dealing with the seller, and it lagged for like 2 weeks, and I finally just told her, would you just come into the office and talk to me? And then I explained to her, like, do you just want to hold this up forever and then you can't sell your house, or do you want to move on? She signed the cancellation and we kept moving, but I gave her a couple of weeks to kick rocks about it and stuff, and whatnot. But as long as I'm on, Steve, the other thing I was going to mention on the Q5 and 6, I've always done the same thing, exactly what Monica said, where I counter them out and say, do not apply. I'm going to now, based on what you told us the other day in our team meeting, I'm going to stop putting does not apply, because with this new fire thing in Big Bear, it could apply. It's possible it could apply. So I don't want to put down doesn't apply, which I used to, because it's starting to come up. Just like back in like 2010, I don't know if you remember, there was a gas meter thing that was coming up at the close of escrows where you had to put a shed on the gas meter, and that would come up as a point of sale problem. So I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to counter it out, period.
Good.
Yeah. And I don't put on the Avid, and they'll tell you this, if you go through any pro standards training, to put down appears or may not be a low flow, or in other words, they're saying what you can visually see, put it down and use a lot of appears, or maybe like you said, but leave it up to the inspector to go in, because inspectors will put on there, it doesn't have low flow toilets, doesn't, that's their job, to go and inspect and open and read model numbers. We're supposed to just put down what we can visually see without opening anything or opening a roof access or doing anything weird, because then we could put ourselves at risk, is what I've been taught.
Good.
Have
Anybody
have any of you had where the lenders are going to want to come back and have an inspector or a contractor come back and re-inspect the property prior to closing because of the snow. And then, especially here in Lake Arrowhead from Crestline, there's been 500 properties that have been damaged by this storm. Some are total losses. Some, the decks have, separated from the home.
Janelle has one that happened too, that fell out because the deck and the cover on the deck ripped off the house. The buyers backed out.
Well, I could see that, but I'm just asking if you're in escrow, if the lender or the insurance company is going to ask for a home to be re-inspected prior to closing.
I haven't had that happen, Monica, but I believe that they have the right to do that.
Mhm.
When we look at, we've had some time periods up here, and I'm sure they applied over there where you're at too, where we've had nearby fires and they'll stop issuing insurance. We have to wait until that lift or that moratorium is lifted so that we can close our escrow and get everything together. So yeah, these extreme weather and situations that we're going through, but there's agents like Monica or experienced agents that have been through this enough time. And so if you're an agent that doesn't have that experience, I would say reach out to someone that you can trust, or go to Kelly and find out what's the best way to handle this. I think that's the big lesson I think we all need to keep in mind. And I've been in this business for a while, but I don't know everything, and sometimes I need to ask other people that, that comes back to that. The only dumb question is the one you don't ask, but I'd say don't be the kind of person who asks everybody in the office and gets 20 different answers.
Yeah, don't keep looking for the one you want. Listen to the wise people.
Because I've had agents that are like that too, where they ask me questions, and I have a sign in my office for that. It's called that makes you an asshole. Because you always ask and then you never do what we said we were going to do, or what don't call me if you're not going to take my recommendation, or at least it's not one of the few recommendations you get, right?
I would imagine you guys are going to get into some situations with final walkthroughs where you can't get to stuff or see stuff or verify stuff, and you're going to be tempted to just gloss over it, right? I mean, that's kind of an extension of is the lender going to re-inspect, which is, if you're going to push to close, make sure your final walkthrough is thorough.
Right. And, it might be that we want to, during these extreme weather situations where we write in as a buyer's agent, any delays due to weather, road closures, or inspections.
That's a great idea. That'll just extend the COE.
Can give you some more time. I'm not sure sellers are going to agree with that. I'm not sure listing agents are going to agree with, or just roll over to that. But the point is, sellers have the obligation to have the property in the same condition as it was when you wrote the offer. And so if they haven't maintained it with, and if you looked at it when there wasn't a lot of snow on the roof and on the deck, and now it's full of it, then you really can't do your inspections correctly.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and something that came to mind while we were talking about this, and it's not anything to do with the specific forms, but a lesson I learned the very hard way was I was selling a house up near the ski slopes, and the owner had the house and he owned the lot next door. And everybody knew that because we wrote on the lot listing that it was, subject to first right of refusal of the buyer for the house. But we had a gentleman come in who was, from out of the area, which he was pretty seasoned in how to put the screws to people, I would say. He wrote an offer for both properties together. We signed it and accepted it. And then he said, well, because it's a vacant land and I'm going to pay cash for the vacant land, I'd like the vacant land to be a separate contract because we're going to build on that, you know? And so then he made it 2 contracts, and my mistake, but we did not make one contingent upon the other. And when he wrote the contract, it was for $1.1 million, but the lot value was about 200,000 and the house value was about 900,000. And then we got near the close and got to the inspection, and the house was in very good shape. But the buyer, because this is what he intended to do all along, said, I would like $100,000 off on the house because due to the inspection. And we picked out a tree in the front yard and took a picture of it and said, go climb this, right? So anyway, we canceled on the contract, but then he said, I don't want to cancel on the lot. I want to buy the lot for 100,000 still. And then he went after my seller in court or mediation. And my seller was I was very fortunate because my seller was an experienced business person. He was retired, and he said, when I called him and told him about the problem that I had created, which I really felt like I did because I didn't protect him with the making it contingent on the other property. He said, well, I'm going to enjoy this because this is the kind of thing I did in my job and I'm going to win. And I said, oh, good for you, Michael. So anyway, he was very gracious to me and not mad at me, which I think he had the right to be a little bit. But long story short, they went to mediation and the guy ended up paying 180 for the lot. And my seller didn't have to pay any commissions on the lot as the resolution that we got in the long run. But the other thing that happened was the guy that bought the house, and after that, because we had to put the house back on the market, he was mad that he didn't get to buy the lot next door. And we let him write a backup offer because the thing was in mediation for a year. But when he finally didn't get the lot, he was pretty upset too. The guy that wrote the backup offer at full price. Because we kept thinking, we're not going to sell it to this guy. There's no way in heck we're going to sell it to this guy for $100,000. He's a crook, you know?
Mhm.
And I think the mediator came up with the same resolution as far as he knew that what the intention was. But I guess what my lesson is, if you're selling contiguous properties that are next to each other and you're making them contingent on each other and the contract gets rewritten in any way, be sure to include the contingency that one is tied to the other, or else you can end up in some pretty hot water. So I don't know if that had anything to do with today's conversation, but it was a lesson that I learned. It's one of the few times I almost got sued. Right?
So I think that's a lesson well learned, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the table, because I think a lot of times we don't realize that the APNs are not connected. You know, they're 2 separate APNs as well. And we have to put that in the contract.
Well, it's a
Right.
double-edged sword too, because you want to do the right thing for the principals, the buyers and the sellers in the transaction. But when these market conditions show up, people get more litigious than before. And so you kind of have to be on double guard for exposing yourself to any of that, because when people don't have as much money as they want, and there's attorneys that'll help them all day long. There's targets, and we just got one that popped up last week, and no one on this Zoom call, and if they were, I wouldn't tell you anyways, but they've got a problem on their hands, and just beware, just dot your I's and cross your T's, especially now.
Yeah, it's a story I've told before, but when we went through the 2008 downturn, 2008 to 12, whatever time period it was for you guys, I remember where I worked previously, one of the agents seller got sued because he didn't disclose correctly that the swallows dropped droppings on the back deck.
Oh, Jesus.
You know, because you know, they were selling the house, and it wasn't during the time of the year when the swallows were here. But when the buyer got a year later into it and had realized that the property value had dropped whatever amount, $100,000 or more, he was angry. He was looking for a reason to go back to the seller for, why did you sell me this property and didn't disclose about this or that, right? So I think what the emphasis of that is, or the lesson there is, like Jim said, when the market shifts and things get tougher, people become more litigious, and things will come out that you haven't seen before. And we all know that in California, you know, you can sue anybody for anything.
Even birds pooping. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So again, the disclosures are really important, and doing a thorough avid. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get an avid as a listing agent that the buyer's agent writes that's, you know, I'm not asking them to do a home inspection, but my gosh, you know, you can't just write everything looks great. And
don't
on
leave
every,
it blank. If you leave sections blank, the court sees that as you were never in the house or in the room.
right.
So say something.
But you're not supposed to go in and describe the room, and you're not supposed to go in the kitchen and say nice granite countertops, which is what a lot of people do. You're supposed to find something, or if you don't find anything, I always write nothing noted.
Right.
You know, for
Nothing
each
noted
room
is something. I was in there and nothing noted, but a lot of times people will just leave it blank. It doesn't get caught. And
right.
I've seen courts say, oh, you never went upstairs. Because for
And-
all
and-
the bedrooms and bathrooms upstairs, the avid's blank. Now you went downstairs because you said this and that. So yeah, say nothing, put something in every room.
Right. Yeah. So it's just important that you fill those out. And then, you know, as a buyer or listing agent, buyer's agent or listing agent, make sure those avids get done within the time period so that they can be included with the disclosures that go out to the buyer's agent within 5 days.
Have you ever received an avid that came with pictures the same day that the inspector was out there, and the realtor took pictures and made the same notations on the avid?
I haven't, but I've been told the recommendation that I've been told is for us not to do the avid during the home inspection.
Well, that's what we had from an agent from Orange County do. They came up at the same time because they were never there. I was always opening the door for the buyer. And then when they came up to do the inspections, she did her avid, but she also took pictures of everything and disclosed pretty much the same thing. And I said, is this an inspection or is this your avid?
Yeah.
Well,
Were they attached to the avid as part of the
Yep.
avid?
Yep.
maybe she didn't even come up. Maybe she just wrote the avid off the inspection report.
Oh, I was there because I said, you will be
Okay.
coming up.
The big distinction with the avid is it's an agent visual. So it does not require you to turn faucets, touch anything, and open stuff.
Mhm.
And so it's just a visual. An inspection is way beyond that. So
So what would
why I
you do when
not
they
put them
send you
together.
pictures, say, this is not to be photographed, it is a visual by your memory and your eyes?
I don't know that causes a problem. I would just say if you're doing an avid, you don't have to go to that length. You don't have to include photos.
Mhm.
It's just a visual description.
I mean, how many times do we get a document like an avid or something else, and the seller says, that's not right. I don't agree to that. That's not correct. That's not a correct assessment of my home. Has anybody ever had that? Where, you know, the buyer says the door doesn't close correctly or whatever.
Yeah.
Something that I always use as, you know, to help get my buyer or seller through that is, we're not agreeing to the items on the avid when we sign it. We are agreeing that we got a copy. We are acknowledging receipt when we sign this
Yeah.
document. We're not agreeing to it. And you know, it's like when the neighbor comes out and goes, hey, this fence is not on the property line. Well, how do you know if it is or isn't?
Hey,
You
Steve,
know,
I had an Avid come in that had an extra bathroom.
perfect.
So I wound up calling the agent and having them fix it, just so you know.
That's adding value. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, then
All
the
right.
buyer's gonna sue 2 years later and make you build a bathroom in their new
Yeah,
house.
where's the bathroom that you put on the Avid? Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Well, does anybody else have anything that we should discuss this morning? If not, I'm going to get started on my driveway.
same here, same here.
Oh, good God.
Anything else for the good of the order? What a
Thanks,
what a
Steve.
great gathering. Go ahead, Elaine.
I just want to say thanks, Steve, for bringing
Oh.
this stuff up. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I didn't know what we were going to talk about, but there's always a few things to talk about. So,
Absolutely.
There always are, right? And when we get good agents here on Wednesday mornings to just say, hey, what's going on? What do you need? There's no question that's everyone else in the room probably has the same question. So I appreciate the dialogue and appreciate your leadership, Steve. Thank you.
you're welcome.
thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Have a great day.
Happy
Thank you.
shuttling,
You too.
everyone. Be safe. Let us know if you need anything.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.